You know what's hilarious in a completely depressing way? There are entire American towns that exist solely because the military decided to put a base there 80 years ago. And now that the military's decided they don't need that base anymore, those towns are just dying. Not slowly declining, actively dying. We're talking about places where 20% of the local economy was directly tied to one military installation, where half the businesses on Main Street catered to soldiers and their families, where home values were stable because there was always steady demand from incoming military personnel. And then the Pentagon releases a base realignment and closure list, and overnight, your town's entire economic foundation vanishes. Jobs disappear, housing markets crash, businesses close, and thousands of people who build their lives around serving military families suddenly have no customers. So today we're going through 10 military towns that are getting absolutely wrecked by base closures or massive downsizing, because someone needs to document what happens when the federal government decides your town's purpose is obsolete. Let's get into it. Here's what people don't understand about military towns and why base closures are so catastrophic. Military bases aren't just employers, they're economic engines. A single base can employ 5,000 to 10,000 people directly, but that's just the beginning. For every military job, there are multiplier effects. Contractors, retail, restaurants. Housing, schools that depend on military kids for enrollment, hospitals that depend on Tricari patients. When you close a base, you're not just eliminating military jobs. You're eliminating the entire economic ecosystem that grew up around those jobs. And unlike a factory closure where maybe another company might move in, when a military base closes, that infrastructure sits empty. Nobody else wants a bunch of barracks and a runway. The towns on this list made a rational decision decades ago. The military showed up, offered stable employment, and the town built around it. Local businesses catered to military families. Real estate investors bought homes to rent to constantly rotating personnel. Everything worked. Until it didn't, until the Pentagon decided they needed fewer bases or different bases, or that this particular location wasn't strategically valuable anymore. And then the whole house of cards collapses. These aren't lazy towns that didn't diversify. These are towns where diversifying was nearly impossible because the military dominated everything. When 70% of your economy is military adjacent, you can't just pivot to tech startups. What makes this worse is these closures are often politically motivated. Bases in powerful congressional districts survive. Bases in less powerful areas get cut. Your town's economic future literally depends on whether your representative has seniority on the Armed Services Committee. And when bases do close, the federal government's help is usually a pittance. Some job training programs, maybe a redevelopment authority that takes 15 years to accomplish nothing. Meanwhile, your town is hemorrhaging population and businesses. Number 10. Warner Robins, Georgia. Starting with a Georgia town that's not fully closed but is experiencing serious pain from downsizing. Warner Robins built itself entirely around Robins Air Force Base. The base employed around 20,000 people at its peak. Downsizing and contractor reductions have cut that significantly. Home values in the area have stagnated or declined 10 to 20% from peak. Warner Robins is very Georgia military town, strip, malls, chain restaurants, housing developments built specifically for rotating military families. When the base cuts jobs, everything suffers simultaneously. The town is trying to diversify, but it's hard when your entire identity and infrastructure was built around one base. Warner Robins is where stability met downsizing and is desperately hoping not to become a closure. Story number 9. Sumter, South Carolina. Sumter is the South Carolina town living in constant fear of closure lists. Shaw Air Force Base is Sumter's entire economy. The base and related activities make up an enormous portion of local employment. Every time BRAC discussions happen, Sumter holds its breath. Home values are lower than they should be because uncertainty kills real estate markets. Sumter is small town South Carolina that exists because of Shaw. There's not much else there. If Shaw closed, the town would likely lose 30 to 40% of its population within a few years. The psychological toll of living in perpetual uncertainty is real. People don't invest. Businesses don't expand. It's economic paralysis. Number 8. Mountain Home, Idaho. Mountain Home is the Idaho town that's geographically isolated and totally dependent on one base. Mountain Home AFB has experienced significant downsizing over the years. The town's population is around 14,000, and a huge chunk of that is military connected. When the base loses squadrons or personnel, the town feels it immediately. Mountain Home is in the middle of nowhere, Idaho. There's no tourism, no agriculture of significance, just the base. Housing demand dropped when downsizing happened. Businesses closed. Mountain Home is where isolation met dependence and both became liabilities. Number 7. Del Rio, Texas. Del Rio sits on the Texas-Mexico border, and Laughlin Air Force Base is basically the only thing keeping it alive. Laughlin has faced rounds of cuts and downsizing. Del Rio's economy is maybe 70% dependent on the base. When personnel numbers drop, the town contracts. Home values have declined. Businesses that catered to pilots in training closed. Del Rio is isolated, hot, and on the border. The base was the one thing that brought young, employed people to town consistently. Without that influx, the town ages and shrinks. Del Rio is where the border meets the base, and both feel unstable. Number 6. Goldsboro, North Carolina. Goldsboro is the North Carolina town that knows it's one BRAC list away from catastrophe. Seymour Johnson is massive for the local economy. Goldsboro isn't huge, maybe 35,000 people. The base brings in thousands of military personnel and contractors. If Seymour Johnson ever closed, Goldsboro would be in serious trouble. Home values reflect this uncertainty. Tobacco country that doesn't grow tobacco anymore, the base is what replaced that economic loss. If the base goes, what replaces the base? Nobody knows. Goldsboro is where economic anxiety is the permanent condition. The devastating economic impact of military base closures and downsizing on American towns. We explore the catastrophic economic consequences. When the federal government downsizes military installations, these installations often anchor local economies, and their changes ripple through communities. First, Great Falls, Montana, Malmstrom Air Force Base downsizing. This city used to be thriving, but is now struggling thanks to base downsizing. Malmstrom was once a much bigger deal, with SCBM fields and larger personnel. Downsizing has gutted parts of the local economy. Population has stagnated or declined. The housing market is soft, and businesses have closed. Great Falls is isolated in central Montana, high plains, and military. When the military piece shrinks, there's not much left. The base downsizing removed the economic engine that kept things afloat. Great Falls is where Montana's military presence shrank and took the town with it. Next, Lompoc, California. Vandenberg Space Force Base changes. Lompoc is a California coastal town that's weirdly struggling despite its location. Vandenberg has gone through restructuring and changes. Lompoc's population is around 45,000, with many base connected. When base employment fluctuates, Lompoc feels it immediately. Housing in Lompoc is cheaper than surrounding California areas because the market is unstable. It's a base town, and base town economics don't follow normal California rules. Lompoc is where coastal California meets military dependence and somehow stays cheap. Number 3. Jacksonville, North Carolina. Camp Lejeune downsizing fears. Jacksonville is a massive Marine Corps town, but also vulnerable. Camp Lejeune is one of the biggest Marine bases, but downsizing has happened. Jacksonville's entire existence is Camp Lejeune. Most are connected to the base. It's a very military town. Strip clubs, tattoo parlors, payday loans, car dealerships. When the base cuts personnel, all of it suffers. The town has no backup plan because the base is so dominant. If Lejeune faced major cuts, Jacksonville would be devastated. Home values would crash. Jacksonville is where the Marines are the economy, and everyone hopes that never changes. Number 2. Killeen, Texas. Fort Hood, now Fort Cavazos. Uncertainty. Killeen is entirely Fort Hood, one of the largest army bases in the world. Killeen's population is around 150,000. Basically all base connected. Any downsizing talks cause panic. Home values are entirely dependent. On base stability, the base is literally the only reason Killeen exists. If Fort Hood faced major cuts, Killeen would become a ghost town. The dependence is so complete that Killeen can't diversify meaningfully. Killeen is where putting all your eggs in one basket means hoping the Army never drops the basket. Number 1. Lawton, Oklahoma. Fort Sill downsizing. Lawton is the town most vulnerable to military downsizing, destroying everything. Fort Sill is Lawton's entire reason for existing. The base is everything. Downsizing has already hurt. Home values have declined 15 to 25%. Businesses closed. Population has stagnated or dropped. Lawton is southwest Oklahoma. There's nothing else there. No. Other industry. If Fort Sill faced major cuts, Lawton would economically collapse. You can't prepare for losing 70% of your economic base. The math doesn't work. Lawton is where military dependence reached its logical extreme, and the future looks terrifying. So what does all this mean? First, military towns are economically fragile in ways most people don't understand. They look stable because bases provide consistent employment, but that stability is an illusion, dependent on Pentagon decisions. Second, base closures aren't just job losses, they're complete economic collapse. You can't replace 10,000 military jobs with a call center. Third, the political nature of base closures makes this worse. Powerful states keep their bases. Less powerful areas lose theirs. Fourth, federal government assistance for impacted communities is usually inadequate. Job training doesn't help when there are no jobs to train for. Fifth, these towns made rational decisions. Decades ago, when bases opened, they couldn't have predicted geopolitics and military strategy would change. They're victims of circumstances they didn't create and can't control. These towns did everything right from an economic development perspective. They supported the base, built infrastructure, created a military-friendly business environment. Despite doing everything right, they're getting economically destroyed by decisions in Washington. Some of these towns will recover, find new economic engines, adapt. Others won't. They'll slowly depopulate, become smaller, poorer. Join the ranks of American towns that used to be something and aren't anymore. For the people living there, this is brutal. Watching your hometown die is demoralizing. Your property loses value. Your job disappears. Your community empties out. And there's nothing you can do about it. So here's my question for you. When the federal government closes a base and destroys a town's economy, does the government have any responsibility to truly rebuild that economy? Or is this just unfortunate but unavoidable? Let me know in the comments, because this is one of the least discussed consequences of military policy decisions. And if you found this perspective on military town economics valuable, maybe subscribe. We cover economic dependence, policy consequences, and towns that get forgotten. Someone has to document. What happens when the Pentagon decides your town's not needed anymore? Might as well be me.